Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the panel, Co-Creating Value in Startup as Leads. Uh, Today, we have a very good mix of speakers in the panel. We have PKG, Anthony, as well as Rajesh. It's good to see a mix of entrepreneurs who have turned investors, as well as professionals who are investing in startups. To give a brief intro, I would like to invite PKG to talk about the investments he has done so far.
Yeah, so I am a member of multiple angel groups in Bangalore. Plus, as the introduction mentioned, I'm spearheading along with Shilan and others the formation of Malabar Angel Network in Kannur. So far, in the last 3 years, I've been an investor since 2016. I've invested or committed investment in about 7 to 8 startups spanning the social enterprise space. That was my first investment. Precision or let's say smart farming, then consumer goods, consumer internet companies, and then most recently electric vehicles. So that's the kind of range.
So it's good to see that he has invested in multiple startups cutting across sectors. And we would get into the details of some of those investments as we move forward. Now to ask Rajesh about the investments.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just as a brief introduction, I am an entrepreneur myself. I founded and run a company called Rapid Value, and we founded this back in 2009. So I was talking to Afsal. In a sense, I'm sort of a dual founder and a professional. And I think one of the topics here is, how do we get more professionals into investing, right? So I would sort of qualify myself in both categories. And I mean, just because I've been running the company, trying to scale it on an ongoing basis, right? And I would say I've also been a fairly informal investor in terms of typically going through connects and areas that interest me. And a couple of investments that I would like to talk about. One is Style, which was founded by Anup Mohan. And he's a homegrown Kerala, investor who is sort of, and I've seen him evolve for quite some time during his startup village days and so on. So Style was one of my first investments. And Style got acquired by Wonic, which was raising Series D from Sequoia. This was, I believe, 2016. And then I did another investment in Anup's next venture, which is again, which is in stealth mode. And then one of the other investments is a company called New Finance, which is a NASCOM warehouse, and they're trying to disrupt the accounting and bookkeeping space using AI. So again, I wouldn't say I have an investment thesis broadly, but generally I've been going with the founding team connection. And also, when the space looks interesting.
So it's good to note that Rajesh, being an entrepreneur, has been able to actually build a very good rapport with the entrepreneurs. And that's what qualifies a person to become a lead as you move forward in terms of helping them close the deal. Now to ask Anthony about the investments.
Thanks, Afsal. Hello, everybody. My name is Anthony. I'm slightly a bit of an outlier in this group because I'm not the traditional investor. I work with a multinational bank as my day job, boring stuff in front of laptops. But I love startups. I enjoy working together with startups. So much so that way back in 2010-11, I wrote a small check to one of my friends running a startup called iTraveler. And he was in some trouble, so I thought I should do it, and I did it. That kind of put me in the investor role for a short time. I followed that up with another check, and then I probably started becoming a formal investor from that point in. And the reason why I try and bring this angle in this discussion is because I see a lot of us in this room who are probably the tagged investors who are coming from probably a family office or have that investor network relations already in place. but I'm probably not that traditional investor. And my agenda probably in this discussion and to also bring about the thought process in your mind is to encourage more professionals of my pedigree or of my background to kind of step in into the forefront of investing and bringing up more startups to the forefront.
That's good to hear that more professionals are now turning investors. And that's the specific reason why we have Anthony here to share about his experience in investing in startup. Now, if you look at the definition of a lead investor is someone who picks up the responsibility of bringing other investors to the table and also helps in making sure that the startup is able to close the round and move forward. So if you go by the words of Naval Ravikant, one of the most prolific lead angels across the world, he's also the co-founder of a firm by the name AngelList. He has listed down 3 characteristics of a lead investor. And the first one is access to the capital. The second one is a proprietary deal flow, access to deals which are there in the pipeline. And the third one is domain knowledge as well as good market fit understanding. So if you were to look at the 3 characteristics which makes a lead, you can realize that the first one, which is access to the capital, is the most important thing which an entrepreneur would be looking at when you start speaking to them. So when it comes to the investments which PKG has done as lead, how do you think the access to the capital has helped in identifying a startup?
See, there's so much you can do being an individual. So, like the previous panels and they were saying, I think it's great to be part of a network, okay? And a network like Indian Angel Network or any other network of that standing, it kind of, if you have 500 members, it is not difficult to figure out 20, 30 interested investors for any thesis, right? So I think being part of a network really helps to get more investors. But it also depends on the context. For example, I have now different experience in being part of Indian Angel Network and different experience in being part of Malabar Angel Network. And I think in the previous panel, Shilan explained very clearly the kind of locational dynamics you have. People in, let's say, metros are a little more exposed to the risk characteristics of angel investment, while people in non-metros, even though they are hard-driven businessmen of their own standing, they may not really appreciate the risk-reward equation. So I think the locational dynamics play a very critical role. So I think being part of a network, it really helped. I don't know if I were on my own, I would have done what I have done. So I think definitely I would recommend, to get access to capital, being part of a network is very important.
Got it. So it's very important to be associated with a group or a syndicate, because that's where you get access to the capital as well as people who are able to bring you the deals. That brings us to the next point, which is how you can make sure that you are able to see good deals happening. That's one thing which is very important for you as an investor as well as a lead investor. So how do you get access to the proprietary deals or more deals coming in? For example, in the case of this Style, how did you come across this opportunity?
Sure. So I think, I was just about to also touch upon the previous point, right? Just because, I have not been part of a formal network. So a lot of my deals or most of the deals that I've invested have come through networks of people that I knew, which I thought, of course, there is a disadvantage that you don't have a predictable deal flow in a sense. And if you are a really dedicated investor, that could be a problem. On the other side, I felt, so I may not answer your question directly in that sense, right? But on the other side, I felt it was very useful because most of the investments that I went into were people that I knew for a while. For example, if I were to take example of Anup, I knew Anup since 2011 in multiple capacities. So I was seeing the journey and there was a trust in the team. So to that extent, it was really helpful for me to structure and help other investors to say that, look, this is a great team. I trust this team, and then able to get that team together or investor team together who could co-invest in that. So I think that is one point. And I think the second, and I just kind of adding to that, right? what I also thought was, at least my experience has been when I was trying, when I'm trying to help raise funds, right? My experience has been capital is available again to some extent, right? Especially the networks that we are mostly in. A lot of us have access to capital. In a lot of cases, people want to invest, but they don't understand the mechanics of investing, like like what kind of valuations would make sense, and especially in a state like Kerala, this is what I was saying, right? We have a lot of people with capital, but we may not have a lot of people who understand the mechanics in terms of the valuation and how does it work and all of that. So I think from that standpoint, also in addition to access of capital, just having somebody who understands those mechanics, which is what the networks are definitely formalizing, and that's a great thing, right? So I think that's really important, because what I found was in the deals that I was supporting or I was leading, just because I was there and I was able to explain the structure to the other investors. It was easier from a founder's standpoint to get a lot more investors together and make the investment happen. And also sort of, in addition to the just the investment, in case of Style, when there was an exit offer on the table, there was also a question of how do you manage the expectations of founders versus other investors. So I think all of that was useful. So maybe I mixed up a couple of those points.
So it's good to know that actually Rajesh brought in a very important point. It's not only capital that the lead investor is bringing to the table, it's also patient capital and also capital which would help the startup move to the next phase. So there are a lot of people who would be ready to write checks, but a lead investor is not necessarily the one who's writing the largest check, but he's the guy who's able to make sure that all those checks go into the right place or provides the right value to that startup. So he has got that obligation also to make sure that all the investors whom he is bringing to the table, they're able to see value coming out of that investment which he's leading. Now to move to the next point, which is more relevant for Anthony, because having good market as well as domain expertise is also one of the important characteristics of a lead investor. So being a professional, I'm sure there would be a lot of startups which would be coming across the domain which you would be working in, and you would know that this is a gap which is clearly felt when you are working in that space, and this company is filling that. So I'm sure that is the way in which most of the professionals look at investing in those startups, and then giving that knowledge which they have to those founders to make sure that they're able to build the company faster. So how has it been useful for you in your investment?
I think in multiple ways, Afzal. So in my story, so it's very unique to one company. So I'm not like the caveat is that I'm not an expert investor. But at least in my experience, what I've seen is being an entrepreneur is very difficult. You need to wear a lot of hats, right? So when you have another person who can be a sounding board, who can actually talk about what's happening in the market from a different perspective, that brings a different perspective altogether on the table, right? So that has definitely helped a lot in the case of iTraveler, where Shiju and I, we used to spend hours discussing and debating on what needs to be done. And the feedback I've received from Shiju always is that, of course, he has his set of other entrepreneur networks and, of course, the investors and stuff like that. But when you talk to a person who doesn't come from the same background, you have a different perspective altogether. That has solved multiple problems in the case of iTraveler, and has helped us to build that relationship. So that's where I think one of the hats that a lead will have to always don is that of a sounding board, right? I mean, somebody who can actually vet some information for you, doesn't have too much, he's not concerned about the outcome of that discussion, like probably an investor would be, and can give some different perspective and some fresh thoughts to the investor, so to the entrepreneur.
Correct.
So I think in the morning there was a debate on what's really the role of a lead investor. I would assume that the lead investor eventually is a substitute for an independent director in large corporates. So he really provides strategic oversight, as well as he's supposed to be, let's say, custodian of ethical or good behavior. Now, lot of people say, look, you must have a lead investor who has domain knowledge. My opinion, it is not required. No, I have seen lead investors in Indian Angel Network who have done 10 to 12 investments over the last 2 to 3 years. I mean, Revati is one example, right? It's not necessary that they should have domain knowledge in every company that they are investing or in industry they are investing. So I think 80% of the issues are common, right? It's really hard-nosed business management. And really that 20% is what the domain would bring in. So I think the role of a lead investor is to really provide that overall business management layer, plus that strategic oversight. And now I think most importantly, I think they have to be the custodian of good behavior, right? After all, you are collecting money from different people, and then you are representing the investors. Like you said, you are accountable to them, right? You are accountable to the investors, so you better be careful, right? So I think that's really the role what they would.
Just a question from me, PKG. So, do you think that the role of a lead investor is clear in today's ecosystem of startups?
So I have seen mixed examples. I have seen very passive lead investors. I mean, we are talking about passive investors.
So it's like an oxymoron where you are saying you are leading as well as you are playing a passive role.
Yes, we have very passive lead investors. We don't get to hear from them after the investment is done, right? And so
Is that kind of behavior acceptable from the other investors? Because what I have seen personally in some of the deals which I have been a part of, since you have been the person who brought the other investors to the table, you play the role of lead investor. The other investors expect you to know, as you have clearly said, about the operating aspects of the company as well. And when they are not kept in the loop about a certain thing happening, for example, an exit opportunity is coming up and there is a lot of discussion happening, but the lead investor is in the loop, the others are not in the loop. And at that time, mostly the other investors look up to the lead to be very transparent. So do you think that is fair to be a passive player at that moment?
No, I think my experience is 80 to 90% of the investors are also passive, right? So I think we need to have more demanding investors. We need to have more demanding lead investors on the entrepreneurs. I think overall the ecosystem should have more push and pull, and I think it's not there. Honestly, it is not to the level that one is required, and that of course you see even in corporates, right? You're not demanding. You go to an AGM and if you ask a question, if you ask a tough question, people don't even answer. So I think that responsibility is still to be absorbed by the ecosystem. I think as we go forward, I think the investors will become more demanding, and you'll have a lot more pressure.
This one point which we discussed in the morning also in one of the sessions. So lead investors normally tend to be wary of the various legal complications which would come into when they are asked to become a board member or director, independent director. So if there are mechanisms which are put in place, this was one of the suggestions which were there in the morning session, that if there are mechanisms which are put in place to make sure that the startups are able to follow a statutory framework, making sure they're complying by all the laws of the land, then it becomes very easy for the lead investor to help them move to the next stage rather than worrying about whether they have taken care of all the licenses and have paid TDS on time. And because of that, they are not violating any of the law. So the role of lead investor needs to be much more simpler if all the statutory or frameworks are put in place to take care of the other operating parameters. When you move forward, once a deal is closed.
Sorry, Afzal, I'll cut you there. In your current startup, do you have a lead investor?
Yes.
You have. Great.
Afzal, at one point, just sort of combining a couple of these points, right? Just sort of addressing both of those points. So one was on the domain knowledge and understanding, right? So at least in my experience, what I felt was, and I'm kind of looking at myself as a professional. While I'm an entrepreneur, I raised my Series A in 2014. By that time, we were already doing significant revenue, and we were doing fairly reasonably well, and we were on a growth path. So to a large extent, I was an operator or a professional from there. At the same time, what I felt was, being an angel investor and being a lead investor, help me two things. One, make sure there's another, another venture which is interesting, right? I mean, and then more importantly, something that is new to me, right? For example, Style was primarily a consumer marketing focused product. And then the other one that I talked about, which is the new finance, and that's very, very focused on automation and finance. And these are all completely different and new areas for me. So it helped me in two ways. One, I would say it was a bi-directional contribution, right? On one side, I'm able to bring in the investment, help them with structuring the deals and helping or getting ideas on scaling and things like that. But on the other side, it was also an opportunity for me to learn areas that I was not aware of. And I think some of the
This is a very
previous
interesting
panelists-
aspect because
and that
by
also
being an
keeps me
investor, you get to
yeah.
actually play the role of an entrepreneur without having to risk your job.
And it's a great learning, right? And so especially for professionals who are trying to become investors, one is investing purely from a financial standpoint, and especially if somebody is investing with an idea of learning about a space, that would also address the problem of having a passive investor, because naturally you're curious to understand what's happening there, and you would, if not on financial metrics, you try to find out what's happening, kind of thing, right? That's one thought.
So we've discussed so far about a lead's role or what is expected out of a lead in closing a round. What's in it for a lead? When we look at, because there would be people who would be looking at what is there in it for me? Is it money? Is it an incentive? So when you look at the various syndicates or the groups which are formed to close a deal, which is termed as syndicate, there would be a lead incentive. So I believe IAN also has got a lead incentive structure. So I would ask PKG to elaborate on that. And there would be another, because while having a core group discussion, we also realized that it's not the incentive which is motivating the lead investor to come to the table. So we would touch upon that aspect. But before that, let's go PKG to understand what is lead incentive.
So what Indian Angel Network does is to allocate a certain percentage of the total capital raised to the lead investor. So typically it's about 3%. But that's not given in the form of money, right? That's more in the form of rights. So let us say let me take the example of a company which I invested, which is Kochi based, farmersfz.com, which is into online distribution of toxic-free fruits and vegetables.
I believe the founder is also there.
Yeah. Oh, is there? Yeah, Pradeep
Pradeep
is
is.
there. Yeah. So now, see, in this company now, when I have invested as a member of IAN, for the amount I invested, I got, say, about 66 shares or so. And because I am the lead investor, I got about 3%. But that 3% of the share, which is about 35 or 40 shares, now there it's partly paid. That means you are actually postponing the payment that you need to make. So you are asked to pay only the face value of the share. Unlike the regular investors who are asked to pay the face value of the share plus the premium, right? So let's say the face value of the share is 10 rupees and the premium is 500 rupees. So you actually end up paying 510 rupees at the time of subscribing to the share. But if you are the lead investor, you don't have to pay that premium at that point in time, and you are given a right to postpone the payment of the premium to an extent that you can pay it at the time of exit. So it is really a notional incentive. It is not so much a hard incentive. So that's the way IAN is structured. But just to repeat the point I made to you in another forum, I made a poll of about 15 lead investors of IAN, of the last 1 year. I called each one of them in the last 5 days to prepare for this panel, and not one of those guys told me that they wanted to be the lead investor for the sake of money. So I think it is really the passion. It's really the intention to help somebody to build a business, to help somebody to build an institution of sustainable value. I think that's really driving the investors, because none of these guys, at least in IAN, I can say, really want that differential money, even if it's going to be realized. I mean, I don't know in how many cases it's been realized, but even if it's going to be realized, I don't think that's going to make them more rich, right? So I think that's really not the driving force. But I was debating with Revati during the lunchtime, and she was saying that's required because that you are putting so much time and so much of your efforts into it. Probably, I think I
I think
think
it's
some of these practices will evolve over a period of time. Right now, for speaking for myself, I don't think I am driven by money or that incentive. I think I am driven by learning, wanting to learn, and wanting to help somebody to build a business.
I totally echo what PKG has said because from my own experience, I was running a startup which I sold to Big Basket a couple of years back, and suddenly I came across a lot of money. And just because I was running it bootstrap for about 5 years, I've cut down my lifestyle to an extent where I didn't need that money. So suddenly I started looking out, and then I realized that there are a lot of other entrepreneurs who may need the help, who may need to actually skip the mistakes which you have done. So I started speaking to entrepreneurs in sectors which I'm interested in or I'm aware of. And I realized that if I'm able to help them get access to the capital or even advisors in the sectors where they would look for, it would help me learn myself as well as help them move faster. So it was not the money which was going into the kitty, it was more of the contribution back to the startup ecosystem which helped me become a lead investor. And it's good, heartening to hear that is the same, the theme across.
Afsal, I think the only point I'd like to add there is, I mean, you're right, perfectly right. I think the passion is what matters because at the end of the day, you're doing an extra mile to help the entrepreneur, and who other than me can say that because I wrote that check not being an investor to my friend. So, but my only point is, if you're looking at a scalable model, probably at a policy level, we need to bring in something to encourage lead investors across the board because that makes a difference, I believe, to the overall ecosystem. Especially when we are trying to come up to a model where we have a network. So we are encouraging multiple investors to step in. And if we don't have a lead investor, it will be a difficult scenario. I think from that perspective, I think at a policy level, it makes a lot of sense to have this understanding that every company, when it's going with a group of investors, there will be a lead. And these are the responsibilities. And this is the kind of incentive that one can imagine by doing that.
It's mostly done in all the angel networks. From a policy level, I hope KSU folks are here. Please note this point as well. So moving forward, a lead plays a very important role in raising the round as well as making sure that the company is scaling up or getting ready for the next round. There are cases where you would have been as part of the investor group, helping them in planning for exits. So that's when most of the heart-wringing conversations happen where the investors who are passive come and ask why I was not kept in the loop or why this is happening. And at times you would also be at loss for words because you also would have missed certain points. You are a lead investor and you are now explainable to those points. So PKG, you would have come across multiple such investments where exit would have happened, where you as lead investor had to handhold the other investors in closing the deal. Was there any instance where they said that they are not going to?
No, I haven't reached that stage.
Okay.
So I think maybe they are more qualified.
So I think Anthony is more qualified to talk about that in the exit which he has got out of iTraveler.
It's ironic that the non-investor here is, sorry, the person who is not having the investor
So it's a
tag
very good strike
has
rate.
gotten
He
the
has
exit.
invested in one startup, has got his money out of that as well.
Yeah, so I think, my story is interesting, right? So over the last 8 years, probably, just been with the startup with Sriju to help him through the ups and downs, more downs than up. But at the end of the whole thing, I think it's a great surprise to me that I'm getting this exit. One of the largest OTAs in the online travel agents in Europe is acquiring iTraveler. So I think from my perspective, what I saw was that not just this buyout, the final buyout, probably for the last couple of years when Sriju has been running around to get a buyout or to sort out the next step of the office organization, I saw that he was always left alone. So I kind of stepped into the shoes of the lead investor because of the need of the hour. Nobody actually asked me to do it. But I saw that Shiju was like running pillar to post, trying to get a deal sorted out, trying to get probably the next round of investment and stuff like that. So many meetings I remember, I have accompanied him as an investor and sometimes as part of the team. Right? I mean, just a silent member of the team. I don't say what my role is. I just say, This is Anthony from iTraveler. So I think the lead's role is very important in such meetings. And what is happening is both the investors and the entrepreneurs, I mean, both of them don't know the significance of this. I see this value because I've gone through these meetings, and when you have another person sitting in the room who is invested and who stayed along for like 7 years to vouch for the startup, it makes a lot of difference. And I think in multiple cases, we have reached the last stages through these joint meetings that we've had, like marathon meetings, a meeting after the other. And finally, the whole deal that's happening now has also been a turnout of all the preparation we did. So I think that is where traditionally we don't expect the investor to step in, but we have to do it as a lead.
It's good to hear that as a lead investor, you're not only supposed to write the check or get the other checks. You also need to play the role of co-entrepreneur or co-founder to make sure that the company is able to scale and move towards an exit or growth.
Yeah, so I had a similar experience in case of Style when, when they were trying to, I think they were trying to raise Series A, and they had an offer at that point from Wonik, and it's probably a short term, right? And so I think it's really more of one is just acting as a sounding board to the founder, and also sort of working with other investors to make sure everybody's expectations are managed, and it eventually becomes a good exit for everybody. So it's a little bit of badging for that. Agree totally with you.
So that brings us to the last conversation topic. How can we bring more founders as well as professionals to become leads? So PKG, you would have the maximum experience of interacting with leads. So what would be your inputs for investors who would like to become leads?
I think somebody mentioned in the morning that you have to start investing, right? I think you have to take the first step, right? Of start investing.
So that's another way of telling that you need to carry your checkbook always.
Yeah, I think
You
you
will
have
know
to.
when you find a good startup. Yes.
Yeah, I think you have to recognize angel investing as an asset class, as someone mentioned in the morning, and really start investing. And obviously things can go wrong. Everything looks fantastic on paper. The founder will say he's the best man on earth, and this is the most unique product in the landscape. So you tend to believe it, and then you know that that's not true always. So I think you will obviously falter in the first few investments, and then you start learning, right? So I think the first step is really to start recognizing angel investment as a risk, as an asset class, and I think it's a great game to be played. That's what I realized in the last 2 years. So if you can't be a king, you can probably be a kingmaker, right? So it's like that, right?
That's a good statement.
So
made,
I think
PKG.
it's a great for me. After spending 32 years in corporate, so in corporate you are bound, right? You are constrained by what you can do and what you can't do, and innovation you never nurtured well in corporate, and then you are seeing people with some great ideas. You are seeing people with a lot of energy, and then you want to be part of the ecosystem. So I think more than returns initially, I think you should really give value for the learning that you will get by interacting with these entrepreneurs, right? So my suggestion would be start investing. Maybe you'll fail, but after getting some experience, you can perhaps graduate to be a lead investor.
Thanks for that, PKG. Now, since you are a professional, Anthony, how would you like to bring more professionals into investing first and then becoming leads? You have one startup exit as your experience. So how would you be able to actually bring more professionals? I'm sure there are some professionals in the audience who would like to hear that from you.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but what I can tell you for sure is, one, I've been the biggest propagator or brand ambassador of investing in startups ever since I did it first time in 2011. I know that a lot of my friends from the professional world are looking forward to or have already taken that step. I think what's important is for organizations like Let's Venture and KSM who are doing such events. I think I was surprised to see that this is the third of this kind, but most of the events I've seen is very startup oriented. Of course, it's important that you need to bring the entrepreneurs in the room and have that interaction with them. But having a curated event just for the investors and for people who like to have a taste of the investment world, this is a perfect forum for that. So I think more of such events and kind of sending the word across through PR and the success stories of the startups would definitely help. I think spreading the word is the best way to do it. We've had a wave of startups. We should just focus on that. That's the only thing that I think can bring in the professionals out of their cocoon and help them to build the startup story.
Yes, I think what I would say is, I always say that the part that I really enjoyed about building a company myself was the fact that I was able to really see it, see something growing, right? And I was really proud of that when I look back. And exactly similar to that, I think with the investments that I made, the limited investments that I made, I was able to see some of these companies that were, coming up and building up with, I would say, sort of lesser effort in a sense, but at the same time, the passion was very similar. So I thought it was more than an investment category, investment class. Of course, it is an investment class, right? But more than an investment class, I thought it was really fulfilling to make a company happen and be part of that journey. And especially for professionals, who can bring in a lot of contribution from their side, I feel it can be really, really fulfilling and rewarding. Not just, of course, financial. There's always a risk, right? And with a lot of others who said, you got to be careful, you got to be, you got to pick your bets and all of that. But from a fulfillment, from a fulfillment standpoint, I think it gives a lot of value. So that is the only message I would give out.
Good.
I think we are running out of time.
To summarize the session, as one very famous rich man has said, there are two ways of investing. First one is DIY, do it yourself. And the second one is follow the lead. The second one helps you become the first. So I'm sure that there will be few investors who are there who are already doing it yourself. Hope this session has helped you understand how you can actually follow the lead and then come back to a point where you become the lead as well. So thank you. Do you have time for question and answer? Okay. So the speakers are available the sideline after the session. You can catch up with them if you have got any queries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, panelists.